You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Over the last few months, we've seen dramatic changes in consumer behaviour, due in the main to the financial climate. Increased prices across the board have meant companies are having to work harder to retain their sales figures. So, is customer experience still as important as it was before the economic crisis? I'm talking with Tim Williams, Planning Director at Agency 440, who believe that customers shape brand futures. So, should brands be now doubling down on their efforts to improve their customer engagement? Tim, you're the Planning Director for a company called 440, and I believe one of its taglines is Behaviour Change Experts. Could you give me a little bit about what it does and what's a Planning Director?
Basically, what we do is help clients with any customer-related challenge, whether that be acquiring them, keeping them, or growing them. And that obviously covers a very broad church of activities from traditional marketing through to what was now known as CRM, which is effectively communications or segmented communications over the course of a customer lifecycle. But increasingly, we're involved in broader customer experience challenges in terms of understanding from an end-to-end perspective across multiple channels how well a client is meeting expectations of their customers, what's good, what's bad, what are the moments of truth, what insights can we derive from talking to customers or listening to their feedback, for example, and how can that be used to make improvements essentially, or targeted improvements where they're going to have the most impact. The ultimate aim, of course, being to ensure that customers are happy to come back to that client and their experience meets their needs and they say nice things about it. So essentially it's that. I mean, and obviously that varies infinitely for every single client situation. No two engagements are the same, which is great because no 2 days are the same, and you get exposure to a number of very different brands and understand from the inside out what their challenges are. Understand very different groups of customers sometimes that we've never worked with in the past, and that's always a good experience. And from a planning point of view, that's basically a fancy word for understanding how to apply insights to practical communications and activities. So how do you best ensure that the experience that you deliver, whether that's a communication experience or an actual product or service experience, is aligned to who your audience is, the demographic profile, their occasion, why they're there today, their expectations, their needs and motivations, etc. So nothing major, but it is it's a fascinating profession.
It seems like it's predominantly digital, is that correct?
It feels that way, especially these days, though I've always argued that to talk in terms of digital versus in real life is a bit of a false dichotomy, to use a fancy word. Because I think increasingly the boundaries are blurred, and if you were to look at your own a day in the life of your own experience of working with brands and how you see advertising or engage with them, or whether it's through the internet or TV or via calling somebody on a call center, for example, you'll find yourself moving from digital to real life and back again all the time. So I think whilst brands and agencies typically like to think in terms of themselves being a digital agency, for example, that the customer doesn't. They don't think in quite the same way. And if I have an online purchase experience, for example, then I need to take the product I buy back for a return and I go into a store to do it. Then you can see how it's a blend of different touch points, and the customer doesn't make that distinction between the two. And I think that's one of the big challenges of customer experience, is to recognize that it's not about putting the experience into neat boxes, because people are not linear and neat. They're more complex and messy.
That's true.
Um, but that's again, that's part of the fun of this job, I suppose, is recognizing that it's not predictable and neat, and you have to understand the what ifs and what they call in the trade the use cases, the occasions or the scenarios in which things may not work in quite the way the brand would ideally like it to work, but it's how a customer wants it to work. And from a customer experience point of view and customer service point of view, we increasingly see, I guess, a push from brands to digital channels to get people to self-serve, whether that be to perform an action online by logging into their account or interacting with a chatbot, for example, which is fine when that works well and you don't have an unusual or complex request or need. But it doesn't work so well when you do have a complex request or need, and it can be quite frustrating to a customer if all I want to do is speak to British Gas about the fact that I can't submit a meter reading on their website anymore, and you end up going around in loops or on hold for hours, or talking to a chatbot that doesn't quite understand your query, etc. So the short answer to your question is
Was that short?
it increasingly digital plays an important part, but I see part of my job is to not forget the reality, which is it's not just digital. It can't just be digital in most situations. You have to think about the experience in the round.
So that brings me on to one of my personal frustrations, is that there seems to be less and less human interaction.
Mm,
And it's almost a thing of the past now to actually speak to a human being. Look at the majority of websites, there's very, very few telephone numbers on there. It becomes very frustrating,
mm.
especially if you've got a problem where I suppose your anticipation levels are high anyway, that you want to get something sorted. And there seems to be an imbalance between company efficiency versus customer satisfaction. And
Mm.
I'm trying to find a way of being able to understand, why is it that more and more companies are just thinking about themselves and their interaction with a client as being functional rather than being an experience.
Yeah, I mean, you could be forgiven for thinking that many customer service departments, the primary role is to avoid contacting customers, because they default to saying, you ring up and they say, well, you can go to our website and probably complete the task that you've calling up for online, or use our chatbot, etc. Which obviously, if I could do that, I would have done it. I know
Yeah.
nobody likes calling up a call center because it's if you can do it yourself. One of the great mysteries, I suppose, of the whole customer experience industry at the moment is that, depending on which figures you believe, billions of pounds and dollars are spent on so-called customer technology.
Yeah.
And that begs the question, well, quite what do we mean by customer technology? Is it CRM systems? Is it call center routing systems? Is it algorithm-driven, AI-driven chatbots, etc.?
Hmm.
And I guess it's all of those things.
Yep.
So lots of money is being spent by brands and by big consultancies and so forth to invest in the tech. But if you were to look at virtually any of the metrics in terms of overall satisfaction levels with brands, or trust in brands and trust in companies, etc., at best it's pretty flat. It doesn't seem to make a huge impact in terms of, I've just spent £1 million on this fantastic new piece of technology. Why aren't my customers happy? And I
Yes.
think the
Because you don't
part
talk
of
to
the
them.
well, quite, yeah. I think part of the reason is that a lot of that technology, and I'm speaking very generally here, so I know that there will be exceptions to this, but it does seem that a lot of the technology that is labeled as being customer centric is actually quite the opposite. It's about driving efficiencies and cost savings.
Hmm.
It's about saying you can reduce the headcount in your call center by X if you invest in this particular piece of AI technology, because that will allow you to solve customer queries that would in the past go into a call center, or even in store, by this wonderful piece of digital kit. Now, I think from our own research into this space, there is uh, you get conflicting evidence. In some instances, that technology is great. We did some research with Leeds University a couple of years ago on the airline sector, and what we found there is that when we asked the question about how does digital technology affect customer trust in airline brands, we were getting mixed messages. On the one hand, people were saying when it comes to things like being able to book online or check in online, or look at apps, for example, that allow you to see where your plane is in real time,
Hmm.
and which gate you need to go to and so forth. That's great. People love that. And when it works, and it works well, it adds to the fluency of the experience, and it's a positive. But on the other hand, when there's a problem or some anomalous situation creeps in, and we've seen this year, in has been a major issue where there have been delays, for example, and lack of staff on the ground,
Hmm.
baggage handling delays, etc., etc. That's when the technology doesn't seem to be in place to address those, if you like, edge case scenarios.
Yeah.
And that's when you need the human interaction, the human touch to say, well, look, my plane's been delayed or cancelled at the last minute. I mean, this happened to me a few years ago, oddly enough. I won't mention the airline, but I had a meeting with them at their head office. And during that meeting, we were talking about the whole issue of delays. And lo and behold, when I was flying back to London after that session, it was the last flight of the day, and it got cancelled at the very last minute. So, and with 10 minutes to go, gate was closed, nobody was around, the airport was effectively closing for the night. There was nobody to say, well, what do I do now? How do I get home? And in that situation, it seems as if there's the brand is heading for the hills. There is no digital solution. But what you really want is just someone to talk to say, okay,
Yeah.
what do I do now? How do I make a claim to get my money back? How do I organize alternative transport or hotel, etc.? But if you're left to your own devices, and it feels, it's not just being left to your own devices, but feeling that the brand doesn't care or
Yes.
is actively trying to avoid you, and they've scarpered, um, that leaves a very negative taste in the mouth of the customer. And there's a thing in behavioral economics called the peak end rule, which effectively means that the memory that's most vivid for you from any experience is the strongest. The one you remember most is the strongest and the last one. So the ideal is that you make your last experience, your last memory of a brand interaction, a positive one. And if you do that, what happened beforehand can get erased. But I think it's very much the case that the technology, when it works, it's great, but you can't rely on that 100%. You've got to have some flexibility and some fat in the system that allows people to talk to people, because there is a kind of a removal of agency that comes into play, that people feel they're being pushed through a system, through a process, a conveyor belt of an experience, particularly in the airline industry, where it feels very much that you have no control over what's going on. And it's particularly in those sorts of situations where a friendly, smiling, helpful person makes all the difference.
We talk about customer service, customer experience, whatever it might be. I'm not sure whether there is or there isn't, or I haven't found one yet, a definition of what
Mm,
customer service is. We all kind of know and hope what we believe it is to having a great experience from soup to nuts, as the Americans call it, from the very beginning of your interaction to the very
yep,
end. We all kind of know what bad customer service is,
mm.
but good customer service, I don't think, has a definition. So when you're working with clients, does it mean that you actually have to understand their definition of customer service? And do you often or occasionally have to re engineer what that actually is?
I think the language people use is very telling. And if you were to ask the question of a client, what do you mean by customer service? The answer they give would be very telling about the sort of organization they come from. And I suppose the traditional definition of customer service is that it's a department, it's a function that's
Yeah,
like a separate call center somewhere or office that's hidden away.
right.
A bit like the old TV advert for Carlsberg customer service department, which was a broom cupboard with a phone that was covered in cobwebs, and it rang once, and the cleaner opens the door and saying, "Well, what's in here? What's this phone?" And he answers the phone and says, "Oh, sorry, wrong number." Um, so for many people, customer service is a bit of and something we need to have, but we rather not have it, because it's a cost and it's for dealing with problems when things go wrong. And ideally, we'd want to not have as few people as possible call in. because that's not very efficient for us as a brand.
And I think that's one of the challenges, actually, because most people perceive customer experience or customer service as a cost.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think of, that there must be a way to actually monetize good customer service. I don't know whether you've come across it yet, but it's very difficult to equate it into pounds, shillings, and pence.
Yeah.
It's much easier to be able to say, "Oh, well, we got this, but we need to reduce our costs."
Yes, I mean, I think it's easier to think in terms of the opposite of return on investment, which is the cost of not having or the cost of having a bad experience, because we can all think in terms of, if you have a terrible experience of a brand, you're unlikely to want to use them again. If you
Yeah.
have a great experience of a brand, that may or may not alter your future behavior. You may have you may use them again regardless if it was an okay experience as opposed to a great experience. And you could argue, well, in that case, the argument is, do you just deliver the bare minimum that you can get away with, and not over deliver? And I think there is a valid commercial point here about the fact that customer service and customer experience is not about gold plating every aspect of the experience. It's about understanding where to focus that investment at the key moments, the key interactions and touch points, and sometimes even the key audience segments that might be more valuable to you, and say, well, actually, this group of people, because they are frequent flyers or because they spend more on average than everyone else, there is an argument for over investing in their experience.
I'll give an example here, actually, because I was fortunate enough to fly a lot of the time, and became a gold card holder on a particular airline. And
Hmm.
every time I'd go there, and I'd ask for an upgrade. Never, ever, ever got an upgrade. And one day I was just sitting with somebody who happened to work for this particular airline next to me, and he said, "Well, you've never get an upgrade because you're at the highest level. We don't need to give you an upgrade."
Hmm.
And I kind of
Hmm.
thought, well, that's a really telling remark to be able to say, why is it that the customers who are obviously spending a lot of money with you as a brand are being treated in the fact that you're now in this box? And I do
Yep.
appreciate that there is the inverse of that, where you get treated like royalty and first class lounges and all that sort of thing. But it's just the perception of people who say, well, I don't need to bother because you're already there.
Hmm. Yeah.
Do you think that permeates down into other brands?
I think it can do, yes. I mean, with loyalty programs, which I know is a whole subject in its own
Yeah.
right.
We'll set
You've got
aside
to,
another hour for that one.
at least, yes. Um, I think the question you have to ask there is what do you want the loyalty program to do? Is it to reward customers who are already behaving in the way you want? So if you're a gold member, for example, you've reached the highest level of what the experience could be. Therefore, they don't necessarily need to incentivize you to behave differently. Whereas for other people, it's about saying, well, if I give you this extra piece of incentive, will that change your behavior in our favor as a brand, that you will book us next time as well? In which case, the idea is that you are buying loyalty effectively as opposed to earning it. And I think that's what I think you're alluding to there, is that some brands are saying, okay, because you have historically been a good customer, we're going to recognize that fact and reward you and give you these unexpected bonuses and surprises.
Hmm.
Surprise and delight me because I wasn't expecting that upgrade, but you're recognizing that I've been a good customer in the past. Therefore, you feel, not a sense of entitlement to that, but you feel great as a result of receiving it. And that might be arguably that's a way of really reinforcing that customer's loyalty, because they not only have a transactional element to it, but an emotional one to it. Whereas if the purpose, and I'm thinking here of store loyalty cards, for example, if the purpose of those is to get you to buy more than you would have done otherwise, or buy more frequently, or choose that brand over the competitor over the road, then yes, that works. And things like Clubcard and Nectar are very good at. I mean, I know they have other purposes behind them in terms of data collection, but as far as offering me, for example, targeted or tailored offers and special prices. I think Club Card do this at the moment, where you get a
Hmm.
Club Card price as opposed to a non-Club Card price, and that's a very visible benefit that the customer can see for why you should go there and not somewhere else. But it feels very transactional and very almost quite cynical, because well, actually, yes, if Tesco's can do this and offer me that loaf of bread at 20p less because I'm using the club card, well, can't Sainsbury's do the same thing? And if they and it's it's a short-term type of loyalty in the sense that yes, it's changed your behavior there and then, but it's a very transactional thing. It's very rational, but it's not the same kind of deep, warm, fuzzy feeling you might get if you're given a sense of surprise and delight. And that I think is there's a term by a book called Jonah Berger, I think it is, about called Contagious, in which he talks about how to create more loyal interactions and how to get people to be stickier in terms of
Hmm.
the relationship with the brand. And one of the techniques he talks about there is sort of variable rewards. You don't know what you're going to get, or if you're going to get anything as a result of being a customer, but it's the surprises, it's the little bonuses, it's the if you like, the scratch card mentality that says,
Yeah.
I've got no idea if I spend £2 on this scratch card if I'll get nothing, or I'll win £50,000. And it's that kind of sense of feeling that you're being recognized, or there's a possibility of something great happening, that creates a more of an emotional attachment as opposed to a purely transactional one. So I think, yeah, loyalty is a complex beast, and it's different models work for different brands, I think, is the short answer.
To a side of that, I noticed on your LinkedIn, and I had already commented on a previous podcast, John Lewis removing its never
Mm.
knowingly undersold moniker. Do you think that's going to have a positive effect as they hope it is, or do you think it's going to have a negative effect?
I know at the time there was a lot of outcry about that in terms of what on earth they're doing. They've had that for about 100 years as their core promise, as it were. Did it make a difference? Probably not, frankly, because I don't think people shop at John Lewis because it's cheaper.
No,
They
probably agree
they
with that.
because it's not,
Yep.
frankly. I've never felt it's a particularly value-driven, price-driven experience. But they shop at John Lewis for the experience, for the customer service element, which is more of a lesser department, more of a mindset
Hmm.
for them. So yeah, it may well be that it's a smart move because they're moving the narrative away from price to experience. Now, whether that's a good thing in the current climate with the cost of living crisis remains to be seen. But I think their audience, frankly, their core loyal audience was never really that fussed about the price, I would argue.
So one of the questions that I've got here is price, or does price trump customer loyalty?
Yes and no.
I knew you were going to
It
say
depends.
that.
Well, I think it depends. I mean, it obviously depends
Yeah.
on the price sensitivity of the audience you're talking about, the nature of the product and brand. If it's a tin of Heinz beans and you're paying £1 in Waitrose and 50p in Morrison's, then on a like-for-like comparison basis, then price clearly does matter.
Yeah.
If it's a holiday you're booking and you say, okay, well, my choice is I don't know, a two-star bed and breakfast hotel in a Bulgarian ski resort, well, as opposed to a self-catered or also a catered, fully catered chalet in Verbier, then for some people the experience absolutely outweighs the price. So it comes back to what is the expectation and the need state of the customer at that point, and that's why it's a big variable. For some people, you will choose. Talking of airlines again, you will choose the carrier based on convenience, number one. Others will choose it based on price point, and they will be happy to get up at 4 in the morning to trek to the other side of the country to get to save 50 quid on the cost of a ticket. For other people, it's no, I want to travel during the middle of the day from a sensible airport, and I'm prepared to pay a bit more for the privilege of having an in-flight snack. So it's not, I think, about to say that any one brand should go over price over experience. I think because it depends on who it is you are talking to, who is your audience, and what matters most to them. And if in the case of John Lewis's core audience, there are some people who will never feel that it's for them because it's, they could probably get similar products for a cheaper price. And if price is what counts most, and increasingly for many people now that is the case, then that does trump experience. But for others, the experience trumps the price difference. So the answer depends on who the audience is and the nature of the product or service that they're considering. So no simple answer, I'm afraid.
So just to extend that a little bit, if price has a bearing on customer service, it's, but some people will say, well, I'm prepared to pay more, and other people say I'm going to pay less. In your discussions with companies, does price determine the level of customer service that's offered? So if you're a low cost airline, no frills is the kind of the
Mm.
tagline they've used. It would seem that no frills also means no customer service.
Yes. Or the definition, I mean, I guess it depends on how they would define customer service, because again, when we looked at the airline sector from a customer trust perspective, the key finding there is that I mean, arguably you could say Ryanair is a more trusted brand than British Airways. And most people will respond to that with horror and think, what on earth do you mean? How can that possibly be the case? But the rationale being is that Ryanair's expectation, my expectation of Ryanair is pretty low to begin with. I don't expect anything from them other than that they're going to get me from A to B eventually, and hopefully in one piece. And I'm making a conscious decision, an informed choice to go with them, because I know there's probably going to be something that goes wrong, but at least I'm saving 100 quid on the ticket. Whereas with a British Airways or Singapore Airlines, for example, if something goes wrong with them, and your expectation to begin with is much higher, so when you're disappointed in a brand, that disappointment is far more accentuated that if your expectation was high to begin with. So if you consider that trust is about meeting expectations, based on that argument, a problem with BA is worse in terms of damaging trust than the problem with Ryanair, because with Ryanair, frankly, you never had much trust in the first place. So I think that's a way to frame that way of thinking about it.
But with British Airways, I think trust would be easier to be re-established
Hmm.
than with Ryanair in your example, if they do things better the next time.
If there is a next time, and I think that's the point, is that you hear many stories of people saying, I'll never fly with them again because last time I did, my experience was so much worse than what I expected it to be. I expected better of British Airways. Those are the sorts of terms that people use. So yes, they arguably have a better chance to recover trust, and a big opportunity to recover trust. And I think there is an argument that I think was first put out by Fred Reichheld, the guy who was behind Net Promoter, who said that if you have a problem as a brand and you resolve that problem really well, then the satisfaction level of that customer is greater than it would have been had they never had a problem in the first place. So I think one of the tricks that many brands fail to pick up on is that if you've had a really bad flurry of customer service problems, what you shouldn't do is pretend they never happened or run away from it. What you should do is actually lean into it and say, look,
Yeah.
yeah, we messed up there. We're really sorry. What we're going to do to make up for it is X, Y, Z. And doing that would actually have a far more positive, from a sort of peak end perspective, impact on those customers. And if they just brushed it under the carpet and said, okay, well, we'll make it difficult for you to claim compensation or get through on to the call center, all that does is exacerbate the frustration and the disappointment that they would feel in that brand. So yes, they do have a bigger opportunity to reinvest in that, winning back that customer's loyalty and satisfaction and trust. Question is, do they choose to do it? And which I think is an interesting debate at the moment, is in terms of can they afford to do that. But from a longer term loyalty point of view, that's how you win people back.
Does today's cost of living crisis exacerbate customer expectations?
I don't, well, in terms of making them higher or,
Well, wanting to feel that they're on their side.
yeah, I see what you mean. Yes. I think it accentuate the point that people want, I think customers want to choose brands that they feel some kind of an affinity to, or that they are on their side, as it were. So they are genuinely looking out for their customers. They're not just looking to maximize profits. And if you think about, I mean, think of the oil sector at the moment, petrol companies who, if the price of crude has decreased by 10p a litre, but the price at the pump hasn't, and that immediately creates this very cynical view from the point of view of all customers about the whole industry that says no, they are solely looking out to maximize profit, and I don't believe them when they talk about being customer centric or anything like that. They're the classic big bad oil company that's purely there for short term uh, price gouging and profiteering. Whereas other brands, I think, are waking up to the fact that they need, if they want to achieve loyalty, they've got to kind of play the role of a hero to some extent rather than an adversary. So if you're seen to be on the side of your customer, i.e., you understand them, you get them, you understand their concerns and anxieties, etc., and you have got some kind of practical solutions in place. So, for example, if you're a subscription management type business, so you're selling digital streaming services or a publishing subscription of some sort, they're the first types of brands to be hit during a downturn.
Hmm.
I think after pubs and restaurants,
Yeah.
so people cut back. They see their direct debits going out every month. And they think, oh, I can cut back on that subscription to the Economist or whatever because it's a luxury. So if they were more creative in offering solutions to that, in terms of, well, you can have put your subscription on pause for 3 months, or offering you cheaper alternatives or lighter versions, etc., etc. Understanding that it's not just a binary. You're either a customer or not, and if you can't afford it, go away. But creating more creative solutions to make it feel that you recognise the difficulties that customers are going through. Here's a well thought through solution. So I think in that sense, customers would expect or would appreciate brands that are you know, saying, "Yeah, I hear you, I understand. We can work this out. That you don't have to go away or find a cheaper alternative. We can find a way for you to stay with us." So I think it's more about, I don't know whether customers are expecting that much now, because I think but because they're not expecting it, that's why it might be more powerful. But I think expectations are always changing regardless, and people have, their experience of a brand in one sector could then color their expectation of brands in completely different ones. So it's a bit of an arms race.
Yeah, because to quote Maslow's triangle of hierarchical needs, I think people are at the second stage, which is survival tomorrow,
Mm,
in that
yes.
respect. And I've known from all the management courses I've been on over the years that people's behavior changes dramatically at that level within Maslow.
Mm.
People are then fighting for existence, and I use that words, in a context, and therefore their loyalties and things like that do change during that perspective. So I'm wondering, in today's crisis of oil, petrol, food prices, gas prices, and everything else, do you think that's going to make fundamental changes to people's behavior? Or do you think, as with Maslow, as they go further up the triangle, they'll revert back to their aspirations that they had maybe a year ago?
I, th- I think we're seeing it in certain sectors, definitely. To take groceries, there's evidence that Lidl and Aldi are now attracting customers who would previously never dream of going to those stores. And there's a flight towards value, as it were,
Hmm.
because for those frequent and important day-to-day living purchases, which are very visible to people, if your shopping basket with one is £100 and it's £70 with another, then that makes a big impact
Hmm.
when, as you say, from the Maslow perspective, people are stuck on the survival mode. Other sectors might be less less sensitive to that if you're talking to an audience that's more insulated. But I think there is definitely evidence that for many sectors there is a flight towards value because people are very conscious of the need to cut back, whether it be due to mortgage rates, fuel, gas and electric, etc. That's causing people to think, well, hang on, the numbers don't stack up, and we need to find ways to minimise weekly expenditure, monthly expenditure. Now, whether that then changes when the economy picks up, I think typically the answer is yes, it does, because then for those sorts of brands and categories where it's about more than just price, it's about quality, it's about the experience, it's about the convenience, etc. And frankly, differentiating from products which are just a commodity into things which are more desirable and branded, and the move from own label to to branded, for example, that tends to be that in the first instance people move, they still shop in Sainsbury's, but they buy Sainsbury's own brand beans as
Hmm.
opposed to Heinz. Do they then go back to Heinz? Well, I think the evidence suggests that they do when they don't notice the price points so much anymore. So I think it's about in a sense, it's about the salience of price and how important that is to people. When you've got a full bank account, you're not that sensitive to a 25p
Yeah.
difference on a tin of beans. When you haven't got that money in the bank, and then every penny counts, and you're hypersensitive to it. But equally, does that change? Do you revert back to that more laissez-faire attitude towards pricing? Some people do, I think, and I think it's to not have to worry about how much the bill's going to be when you get to the checkout is a very different mindset to someone who does have to worry and is having to add it up as they go along. But people don't want to be in that mindset of having to scrimp and save all the time, or worrying about what the bill's going to be. So I think there is an argument that if when the economy turns around, that many people will fly away from Lidl and Aldi because they don't want to feel that that's a symbol of their distress. They want to be able to feel that I can shop where I like because I don't need to worry anymore about price points, because there's that kind of emotional aspect to it as opposed to the purely rational and economic. But we shall see. We shall
We
see.
shall see. Yeah, the future will holds a lot for us. One of the final questions, and this is much more general about positive customer experience. Is there any way of demonstrating the value of a positive customer experience to the board, to those people who are actually making not the day-to-day decisions, but the strategy decisions?
I remember a few years ago I was working for B&Q, and there was a story. I wasn't there at the time, but there was a story of a senior leadership team meeting, an away day they had in some hotel, where they were discussing weighty matters for the course of a few hours. And towards the end of the session, the facilitator revealed to them that behind that, what you think is a mirror, is actually a group of your high value customers who've been watching you all day and have been actively listening to what you're saying about them and their experience of the brand and so forth. And the initial response is one of shock.
Yes.
But then the invited customers were invited to come in and join the meeting and have talk to those senior people who, not all of them were typically on the front line, as it were. They were working in head office. They weren't on a regular basis visiting stores and talking
Hmm.
to customers. And they found that experience, once they got over the initial shock, was incredibly powerful because it gave them a whole different perspective on how they thought the customer was viewing the brand and their experience in store versus the reality, in the own words of the customer. So in that sense, to demonstrate the value of the customer experience, in the sense that it's not just a intellectual exercise that says, okay, well, yes, good has to be better than bad, obviously, but I'm not quite sure what that means from an accounting point of view, as opposed to thinking, well, actually, now I've got a deeper understanding of what customers are really experiencing, and what they care about. And often what they care about are things which you probably wouldn't have realized if you hadn't spoken to them in person. I like to use the example of when people do customer satisfaction surveys. One of my biggest bugbears is that they typically ask the questions that the brand thinks is important to them, to
Yes,
the brand.
absolutely.
What did you think of X, Y, Z?
Yep.
And it may be that, well, X, Y, and Z were fine, but A, B, and C were awful. But you didn't ask me about A, B, and C, so you'll never know.
Yep.
And I think it's those hidden nuggets, those insights that you would only ever get to by actively listening to people and almost sort of inviting them to describe in their own terms who they are, why they're there, what was good, what was bad, what things are potentially surprising about the experience that makes a big difference. And often the micro things, the small things that make all of the big difference when it comes to behavioral loyalty. Which behavioral loyalty is generally not something that customers think about that often. It's you don't necessarily need your customers to be thinking about your brand all the time. In fact, you don't want them to think about your brand all the time. You just want them to behave and act and almost out of habit as opposed to making a considered choice. And once you start thinking in those terms about, well, what is it that would cause me on a habitual basis to choose brand X over brand Y as my default behavior, it's the small things that are causing that behavior to happen. It's not the big, profound issues necessarily. It could be something as simple as, well, I go to that particular DIY store because the car park is easy to get a space in,
Yeah.
or because the checkout people are not as grumpy as they are in the one down the road. It could be small things like that which you'd be surprised that can color your whole perception of the brand and put you off from going there again. And it's often a very small thing that stops you from being behaviorally loyal. So I think the question of how do you measure it from a economic return point of view, again, I would phrase that the other way around to say, well, you can certainly measure the negative impact of people not coming back. So, one extra store visit a year for some brands is worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
So what's the cost of the opportunity cost there, or the lost revenue that you could have got had you managed to include or encourage that customer to come back again? So often talking in terms of negatives is perhaps concentrates the minds better in terms of if you don't do this, then you will lose. You'll see churn, you'll see a decline in average basket value, etc. But there is no simple equation that says that an investment of X amount of money into this broad thing called customer experience or customer service will deliver Y in return, because the variables for that are so huge. It's not a simple put the money in here and out comes the answer down the balance sheet. But that's why it's important to understand where to invest that money, and where the opportunities to really make a difference are. And it may be that there are some aspects of the experience that are great. You don't need to do any more on that.
Yeah.
Just carry on doing it. But there could be some where you're fixing problems that will stop people from leaving, and some where you just by doing a small thing you can make the difference between this being an okay visit, a once only but okay visit, to a, well, actually no, that was more than okay, and I'm going to come back again next time. But it's about knowing what those moments are, and also knowing where does fixing that for enough people merit the investment, because it's obviously just fixing it for a small number of people who are not necessarily economically valuable to you is not a sensible investment that your finance director would sign off on. But if there's a market for the investment and it's going to make a big difference to their behavior, and you can test it, and I think that's an important point here, is that typically we would always recommend a small scale test to prove the hypothesis that
Mm-hmm.
this audience, if you do X to this audience and improve this part of their experience as opposed to that audience, or a different part of the experience, you will see a change in their behavior. But with that, of course, you need to understand, well, given the nature of your category, what is the behavior that you'd want to see them do next? And it may be For some brands, if it's an infrequent purchase cycle, the behavior is, well, you want them to sign up to receive a newsletter, for example, or to go for a test drive, or to um, talk about them on social media or through word of mouth, etc.
Hmm.
So it depends on what it is, what the return you're looking for is. For some, it's a very quick, immediate financial return. It works or it doesn't, and you can see the sales results immediately. But for other categories, it's a longer term thing, given the nature of what they're selling. So yeah, it's not there is no off the shelf ROI model. I think it depends entirely on the category, the brand, and the audience you're talking about.
Well, Tim, time seems to have flown by. I mean,
Mm,
we could probably talk for at least another hour on this. And what I would like to do is perhaps come back to you in a period of time, maybe a couple of months, to talk about the loyalty program, because I think there's plenty of companies that are looking to be able to utilize loyalty programs, and getting your
yeah.
insight would be really, really valuable. But for now, Tim, it's been a great discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, John. It's been really enjoyable.